Let's have our next question.
Deborah Back. Has the UK compromised too much in Brexit negotiations due to the stubborn rigidity of the EU?
This, of course, just after we've heard from Michel Barnier in his response, his first response to the White Paper, which was, it's fair to say, polite but cool. I hate to go to you again, first off, Tim Stanley, but I think you probably are the right person to address this first.
I think they have. I am one of those people who would be happy with the government's customs proposal if that's what we ended up with. But my fear is that having opened the door to compromise on goods, they have shown the EU where they are prepared to go next and what they might next compromise on. And that's exactly what Michel Barnier spelled out today. In fact, there was an extraordinary contradiction between the Prime Minister being in Northern Ireland and essentially saying, this deal that I have come up with on goods is the final deal and there'll be no more compromise. And then Michel Barnier in Brussels saying, well, we quite like what you've given us on goods, but we feel you can't separate goods and services. And that's one of the many other concessions that's going to be made. Why? Well, because the EU sees its market functioning with four freedoms. Freedom of movement of labour, of money, of goods and of services. And it doesn't want to just give Britain one deal on goods. It wants to control what Britain does when it comes to money and to services and also to the free movement of people as well. So what the EU is going to say in the next few weeks is, you've shown us that you're prepared to meet us halfway, you're prepared to work with us when it comes to goods, so why not give us the other stuff too? Now the problem is I might trust the government to hold the line on goods had it not made so many other concessions and compromises up until this point. The government has already said £40 billion is on the table as our divorce settlement. The government has already said EU citizens' rights guaranteed. The government has already said defence and intelligence cooperation. There you go, you can have that. So knowing what the government has been prepared to concede thus far, I have no doubt that it will cave on the other three things too.
So you think, with a phrase that has become current this week, the Brexit dream is dying, yes?
No, I don't actually agree with that, because there are many different dreams when it comes to Brexit. And there are many different ones that we could end up with. I recall at one stage in the debate during the referendum, which was quite common to hear people say we could be like Norway. We could be in the EEA, that's one possibility. Donald Tusk at one point held up the possibility of a grand free trade deal like Canada. There's also even the possibility of no deal, which is described as doomsday, but 90-odd-something% of the world's trade in goods is done by WTO rules. There are other alternatives. Ironically, the government seems to have talked itself into backing what could turn out to be the worst alternative, which is that we sign up to all of these arrangements with the EU, and they set the rules for them. Okay, when it comes to goods, fine, do it. I don't really care. It's a relatively small proportion of our economy anyway. But for goodness sake, the government must not make the same compromise when it comes to services, the city, or the free movement of people.
Well, we just heard Jess Phillips whisper the word nightmare when the Brexit dream was mentioned there. What's your response to the question?
I don't even need to speak, and I get clapped. So I suppose it's a home advantage issue there. I mean, my view is on the question is that the EU doesn't have to compromise with the UK. The UK made the decision, whether you agree with that rightly or wrongly, to leave the European Union, and the EU is there to protect the interests of the other member states within it. And for the UK to expect it to sort of bow over and agree to things is the reason we've had to make all of these concessions that Tim has pointed out, is that's just going to carry on. We have to come to an understanding that they don't have to give us what we want because we walked away. It was us that walked
away. So your answer to this question is a resounding no.
Yeah, I think no. I don't think. I don't think we're anywhere near into the soft position I would like to see. I mean, I note Tim's mention of a Norway. I would happily do a Norway and remain essentially part of the EEA, stay in the customs union, stay in the single market. I think that would be fine, and I imagine that is actually the only solution. It's the only solution to the Northern Ireland border issue, which is completely and utterly insurmountable at the moment, because what Barnier is suggesting of the border being essentially a unified island would completely and utterly undo the Belfast Agreement. And Theresa May, quite rightly, has pointed out that no UK Prime Minister would agree to that. So they're both right, but one person has all the power, and it was us that gave it to them.
Sharon Burrows, as well as answering the question, can you give us a bit of a flavour of what feeling is in Brussels at the moment?
Well, you can hear from the accent that I'm Australian, so, you know, I look at it from a global perspective, and frankly, the lens is jobs, jobs and jobs. If you're looking after the British people, without the hope of industry, manufacturing in this part of the world, when you look at the reality, if you in fact aren't in the customs union, if you don't have a common market, then more than half of your trade or thereabouts is actually in goods and services with the EU. How do you protect those jobs? And bringing that home, my understanding is that Jaguar Rover here directly hires something like 40,000 working people, and there's about 250, 250,000 or so in the supply chains. Now that would be the concerns of the union movement. So I know that for the TUC, staying in the customs union, staying in the common market, protecting the rights of working people that they have under the EU directives, because frankly down the road you have Amazon where people are frightened to go to the toilet. Now, is 0 hours contracts, is that level of fear, Amazon versus Jaguar Rover, good union jobs, which would you choose for your sons and daughters?
All right. Tobias Elwood, just a reminder of the question, since you're a member of the government. Has the UK compromised too much in Brexit negotiations due to the stubborn rigidity of the EU?
Well, I'm wanted to comment on the many dreams of Brexit, which sounds actually like a bad Eurovision Song Contest entry. The question itself was always going to be difficult. It's one of the reasons why perhaps we don't do referenda too often. It's like we voted to change the colour of this room that we're in now, but didn't agree what colour it would be. And every one of us have got different interpretation, whether we are Brexiteers or whether we're Remainers. Now, I'm saying I'm neither of those. I'm actually a Democrat that says, let's get on with this. And it was for the Prime Minister to then interpret what happened during that referendum about returning money, making sure that we had control over our borders, and making sure we had control over our laws. That is what our Prime Minister had to do. There is no yes solution here which will balance out the extreme views of the Brexiteers and the extreme views of the Remainers. It is therefore essential that we have compromise. And this is exactly what the White Paper does. It means that we have, for the Remainers, we have access to goods and services that deal with Europe as well. We have financial markets as well. And on the Leave campaign side of things, the EU bill stops. We leave the customs union, we leave the agricultural policy, we leave the common fisheries policy, and of course we're able to strike our own deals. And that's where we differ from the Norway model. Norway is not allowed to strike its own deals. And you look to the actual future now, and in the next couple of decades, 90% of the growth markets or opportunities will be outside of the EU. And that's where we need to set our vision.
Can I just ask you to address the point that Tim Stanley made, which is one that many of your colleagues make, which is this is just the beginning of a negotiation, and there are therefore bound to be more compromises down the road?
I think that's fair. If you look at the timetable of where we're actually moving forward with this, we've now got a comprehensive, detailed white paper. I've not seen anything from the Brexiteers. I've not seen anything from Labour either. This is a model that I hope people can put their country before their party, because I really truly believe the complexity of what undoing or creating something else that's taking over 50 years or so of operations with the EU, we're not going to get much better than this. But you're absolutely right.
You
we
accept
slide
that
this
the
across
government
the
is going
table.
to have to
We
give
slide
more
this
away.
across the table, and we've heard Michel Barnier come forward and say, yes, this is a great starting point, or this is how we can go forward.
Jess Phillips, just before we move on to the next question, do you want to respond to that pop at Labour? It's true, isn't it? We don't really know what you want either.
I think the first thing I'd like to have a pop at is the idea that there's 90% of the trade outside of the rest of the world. So the EU just
Over the
signed
next-
in the extra world. So the EU just signed a trade deal
Over
with
the next 2
Japan.
decades, I was saying.
With Japan that would cover a third of the global GDP, with Japan and the EU together. So, I mean, I'm no mathematician, but that doesn't sound like 90% exists elsewhere. So that's the first thing that I think I would challenge. But statistics are always thrown around by politicians.
Yeah, but
and
what
they
about
can mean
Labour's-
anything.
what about Labour's position?
Labour's position, I mean, I think that it's fair to say that all sides have not always been the clearest, and it's been very, very confusing for all the country to understand which politicians are saying which particular things. I think that the Labour position is moving much more in the direction that I personally, as a Labour Member of Parliament, would want to see, which is somewhere towards the EEA. But Labour's position at the moment is that they feel that we should stay in the customs union. They've been incredibly clear about that, because they know, at least, that the Northern Irish issue can't be solved with this sort of unicorn idea that we can have everything and have our say and have our cake and be, immensely thin after we've eaten the cake. It's just a nonsense. And the issue is, the Labour position about staying in the customs union is clear. On the single market, the Labour Party is concerned about, obviously, issues of free movement, and so squaring that circle is still very difficult.
But Labour is
Okay,
still
well,
in
no,
favour
actually,
of
I'm gonna-
leaving the EU. We
Tim
are
Stanley-
all in favour of leaving the EU. That's what the majority for is in Parliament. We talk
Tim
about
Stanley, I'm
many
gonna
different kinds of
stop
Brexits. We're all
you
united on that.
There, because we want to move on to the next question, which is...
We are. Parliament
which
is,
forgive
your
me,
MPs are.
You can come back to it in a
Parliament
second, because
is.
the next question is related to all this, and we'll give you a chance to say some of those things. Yes.
Tony Price, are the chances of a second referendum improving as the government is unable to agree a way forward?
Tim Stanley.
Oh, right. Sorry, I just took a breather then. I'm back. Are the chances of a second referendum? Golly, I really, really hope not. The reason why I hope not is because I think many people in this country would perversely, it might sound paradoxical, would regard that as being as much of a betrayal of the first vote as if Brexit didn't happen at all, because they would regard it as being part of the EU's pattern of behaviour of countries vote for one thing, the EU says, nah, go away and think about it, and then it holds another referendum and many others until it eventually gets the result it wants. Do I think it's become more likely? Well, actually, I'm sorry for interrupting back then, because this does bring me back to the point about what is there a majority for in Parliament, because that's the key thing. That's the domestic reality. There's an EU reality of what the EU demands, and there's a domestic reality of, as a result of that very close result in the election, what is actually possible in Parliament. And the realities we learned this week as the government tried to force through its customs bill is that there is not a parliamentary majority for no deal, but there is also not a parliamentary majority for a soft Brexit. So I think in many ways this is going to be taken out of the government's hands at some point. If the government faces too many demands from the EU, if it cannot accept those demands, it will not fall back onto no deal, I suspect. I suspect that's the moment to which the Prime Minister goes. Signatures are already being collected. I've been told there are about 35 already currently from the back benches. That's probably the point at which the Prime Minister goes. Then I think the situation we're into is a Norway-style compromise. I don't think we're into second referendum territory, because if nothing else, Jeremy Corbyn himself has ruled it out. And I never thought I'd say this as a Brexiteer, but God bless Jeremy Corbyn for being leader of the Labour Party, because so long as he is, Brexit is still going to happen.
Sharon Burrow, you look at this slightly as an outsider, but what's your judgment on that?
Well, I'm kind of a bit stunned. I'm sitting here thinking that, first of all, I can tell you that as a trade unionist, we would never cut a deal and not go back to the people to get it ratified. So certainly, whether it's a ballot of the public, whether it's an election, whatever the arrangement is, I don't think anybody should be subjected, when they don't know what it will have as an impact on their future, to a secret deal. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm still stunned at Tobias's position. So are the people of the UK really serious about subjecting their children and grandchildren, some of them themselves, to up to 2 decades of massive unemployment while you get this magic trade deals in place with the 90% that, frankly, I question as well, as Jess did? But I'm also looking at the economic reality here, because my understanding, last time I looked, is that wages in the UK are not yet back in real terms to pre-crisis levels. So people are already living on the edge. They're already really frightened for their jobs and their security with 0 hours contracts, short-term contracts, really a devastation of workers' rights. And then what? Unemployment, no wages growth. You're already in the context of the global wages crisis that we're facing around the world because of corporate greed. And so you have no tools left then in the interim to clean all that up. Where do the jobs come from? How do you raise wages? How do people live with dignity? And how do you guarantee fundamental rights without being in the common market, having a common customs union or being in the customs union, and having the equivalent, at least, of the directives for rights? But more importantly, the jobs. Where are the jobs going to come from?
We'll let Tobias Ellwood reflect on that onslaught for a moment or two. Let's just hear from, before he responds, before Tobias Ellwood responds, let's hear from Jess Phillips.
So the question was about whether it's more likely. I mean, actually, this week I have, for the first time, felt that it was more likely. I still think there's only probably a very small chance that there will be a second referendum. I think that the scars of the first referendum are still very much weeping all over our country, with massive rise in racism and division, and it's not something that I think people are going to run towards. I think, was it Brenda from Bristol speaks for the entire nation often when she was moaning about not another vote. I think people do want us to get on with it. And also I would challenge what Tim said about there not being a parliamentary majority for a soft Brexit, because there absolutely is a parliamentary majority for a soft Brexit. It just means that Theresa May has to think about the country and not her own job, because actually if she whips her MPs, the vast majority are in the much softer Brexit area. There's about 87 of them who, every single thing that Sharon just said about where the jobs are going to come from, people living already right on the edge, those 87 people haven't got a clue about that. They don't care. Their ideology is coming way before the people who live here in Birmingham, way before the people who live even in their constituencies. And actually, there is definitely a parliamentary majority that Theresa May, if she could command it, would get through.
Tobias Ellwood, just returning to the question about a referendum. Is it more likely?
I think not, because you would have to go through a period of legislation for that to actually happen. And you need to give time, first of all, for this to work. Because what is the alternative that you're wanting to vote on? What is the comparison? I suppose you can have a line in the sand of what it would look like in remaining, but what does leaving look like? And just to clarify, because I think I was taken out of context there, it's absolutely important that we remain in partnership with Europe. 50% of our trade is with Europe. We cannot turn our backs on that. We, for many reasons, we are very, very strong, very influential in Europe. Financial services, 15% of all of the financial services capability in Europe comes from the UK. Talk about oil and gas, pharma, creative industries, life sciences, aerospace. We are not just the best in Europe, but we're leaders in the world. And now it comes from security, on policing, on military and intelligence. It would be daft at this stage for the EU to turn their back on our capability to make Europe less safe. That's why we need to push forward and allow this the opportunity and get a consensus right across Parliament and the country to say, let the Prime Minister have an opportunity, back this and make it work. No deal solution is a no-win for everybody.
A few heckles
true.
from
That
our
is
audience
true.
and applause. If you have strong views about this, do get in touch with any answers, any.answers@bbc.co.uk.